So good afternoon and a very warm welcome to the 2021 annual meeting of the New South Wales Division of the Australian Academy of Technology and Engineering. So my name is Anne Green and I'm honoured to be the chair of the New South Wales Division. So thank you all for joining this meeting today. So to begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia. We pay our respects to elders past and present, and extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today. I'm on the land of the Camaragal people of the Eora Nation, and I'm sure there are many other lands on which you're sitting at the moment. So let me now start the proceedings, but as well as welcoming our New South Wales Fellows, I would like to welcome and introduce the ATSE returning officers who are present for the meeting today. That's Tracy Watson, who's the Governance Manager and the Company Secretary, Elvira Coper, who's Fellowship Manager, Harry Rolfe, who's Senior Policy Manager, and also thank you very much to our technical people, Events Manager Mitch Piercy and Luke Schofield. So they will be attending the meeting and assisting with any possible requirements for the election of the chair and secretary. And I also would like to remind you that this meeting is being recorded. Right. So this has been sent to you. This is the agenda for today, and I'd like to hear if there are any additional items that people would like to add to the agenda. Mindful that it's going to be a fairly pressured meeting. We need to finish on time. Okay, so thank you. So I'll stop sharing so you don't just see a screen. Right. So could I start first? Robin, if you would please give me any apologies.
Thank you, Anne. I only have two, Professor Laura Paul Warren and Stuart Baker.
Thank you. I've again sent to everybody the annual report, but I have three additional things to add, honours, hot off the press. So the three ATSE Fellows who were recently in the news and I'd like to acknowledge. One, Professor Michelle Simmons, AO, who's a Fellow of the Royal Society, has been awarded their premier physics accolade, which is the Bakerian Medal and Lecture from the Royal Society London. Dr. Alison Todd, who had an article in the paper on her excellent work from the company SpeedX in developing rapid new diagnostic tests for COVID-19 variants. And very, very recent, I'd like to acknowledge Dick Kell, who has been given the highest award from the International Federation of Consulting Engineers, the Louis Prangi Award, at the Congress last night. And this is for significant service to the profession and the Federation. So congratulations to those three. Yeah. So the next item is the minutes, which have been circulated. So could I ask if there are any corrections or amendments to the minutes? If not, I would really like to have someone to propose accepting the minutes and a seconder. So I can see your hands. So John Baxter proposing, and
I'll second if you like, Anne. It's Annabelle.
Thank you. Thank you, second. Let me just go to gallery view so I can see everybody. Okay. Thank you for that. And I'm hoping that everybody accepts the minutes. Thank you. So the next item is my annual report, which again was sent to you, but I will highlight some of the items. So this year certainly has continued to be a challenge as we're facing the ongoing consequences of this COVID-19 pandemic. And although there have been significant changes in the way all of our activities have been undertaken, we have been able to adapt, and we've had another very successful year with increased impact and relevance across the community. So the committee met on 9 occasions since the last annual meeting, and all of those meetings were held on Zoom. It's very disappointing not to have face-to-face meetings, but of course, in this digital environment, we've been able to enable the attendance by committee members who are either on remote locations or who have very demanding timetables. A lunch to welcome the 2020 new fellows based in New South Wales was held in December, concurrently with the last committee meeting of that year. And again, many thanks to Alan Chappell for facilitating this event at the splendid Royal Sydney Yacht Squadron. 10 new fellows were attending, including one from 2019, and we were very pleased to welcome new committee members, Dr. Sarah Pearce and Dr. Adi Patterson at that meeting. So two of our long-standing committee members have stepped down during the year, Dr. Trevor Bird and Mr. Alan Chappell, and I'd like to acknowledge their commitment and support with membership, academy events and submissions, and to thank them both for their substantial contributions. I'm very pleased to say that both will be continuing as corresponding members. So this year we've had an active program of events. The 2020 Chaikin Oration, the glooming global food crisis, challenge and opportunity by the Honourable John Anderson, was held not in 2020, but in February 2021, and conducted as a hybrid luncheon event from the Union Universities and Schools Club. There were approximately 50 fellows and guests attending in person, and a similar number were online. So the convener of the ATSI Union Club lunches, Dick Kell, the weekend away to Jindabyne, David Tanner, and Robin, co-chair of the recent and highly successful online symposium, they have provided reports, and I'll ask them to actually present those later. So in the current circumstances, we had organised a weekend away to Newcastle and the Hunter Valley in October, but sadly that has had to be postponed until next year. So there are other committee members who have contributed to the forums and board committees, and I'm very grateful to their expertise and commitment. So I said 10 new fellows from New South Wales were elected in November 2020, and that's extremely impressive. They are Adjunct Professor Trevor Danos, AM, Professor Renata Egan, Professor Stuart Kahn, Dr. Sarah Pearce, Professor Simon Ringer, Professor Cordita Silamulia, Professor Daichao Sheng, Professor Mark Stewart, Professor Hala Zweikat, and Professor Willie Swanepoel. I mean, this is a fabulous result, and I don't think it's going to be repeated this year, but we congratulate all of them. It's amazing. And I'd also like to acknowledge the work of our membership coordinator then, Professor Laura Poole-Warren. And the report from Laura is also presented later. So the election of new board members was held in October 2020, and we congratulate Richard Sheldrake for being re-elected a second term, and he joins Mark Hoffman, who continues as a board member. So with the completion of the strategic plan 20 to 2025 and the governance review, the Academy is moving to refresh its leadership and its goals. So we greatly appreciate the contribution of the New South Wales Fellows, Professor Annabelle Duncan and Mr. Chris Von Willer as members of the Governance Review Panel, and Trevor Danos as a member of the Governance Implementation Working Group. So thank you very much to those fellows. Very special news during the year was Kathy Foley appointed to the role of Chief Scientist of Australia in January 2021. So this is a fantastic outcome, and Kathy follows Alan Finkel in the role. So many congratulations to Kathy on this appointment, and we nominated her to be the 2021 Chaikin Orator, and her oration, A Lifetime of Preparation, was to be held in October, but it's now going to be postponed until next year. So several other New South Wales Fellows gained prestigious positions and honours during the year. Attila Brungs, whom I hope is online, we have to see, has been appointed Vice-Chancellor of University of New South Wales commencing January next year. Sarah Pearce is now Director of the Square Kilometre Array Low Telescope in Australia, and we'll hear from Sarah tonight. Dr. Susan Pond was elected President of the Royal Society of New South Wales, and two of our fellows were elected to the Australian Academy of Science, Hala Zweikat and Greg Clark. Hala was also the recipient of a Fulbright Scholarship. So many congratulations to all these distinguished fellows for their achievements. Under the Order of Australia Awards in 2021, we congratulated New South Wales Fellows with AOs, Chris Fell, Graham Goodwin and Barry Inglis, and they were from the Australia Day Awards. and Bronwyn Evans from the Queen's Birthday Awards. That was for an AM. So it's somewhat unusual, but very, very pleasing that none of our New South Wales Fellows have passed away since our last annual meeting. And this is unusual. Perhaps we are looking better after ourselves better. So this year has seen consolidation of the major changes in the Academy, the structures, the Secretariat, and the relocation to Canberra. There's much enthusiasm and commitment to addressing the goals of the strategic plan, engaging more with all our fellows and increasing the impact of ATSE nationally. So at the annual meeting in 2020, we were very privileged to hear from our CEO, Kylie Walker, who spoke on supporting Australia to thrive through technology and engineering. And at the annual meeting tonight, we're very pleased to be able to welcome Sarah Pearce, Director of SKA Low Australia, as our distinguished speaker. One of the key events during the year was last November, the joint Royal Society and Academies Forum, and that was held on November the 5th and hosted by Her Excellency, the Honourable Margaret Beazley, Governor of New South Wales. Annabelle Duncan contributed as a member of the Program Committee, and Robin King and Trevor Bird represented our Academy on the Planning Committee. The topic for discussion was after COVID-19, okay, a bit premature, creating the best of times from the worst of times. And again, there was provision for a real-time podcast to enable a greater audience than can be accommodated at Government House. The event was very successful, and the now Royal Society President, Susan Pond, was chair of the program, and Genevieve Bell was one of the speakers. This year, the joint forum is going to be held on November the 4th and the 5th, and the proposed title for the program is The Power and the Peril in the Digital Age. So the Stellar program continues to be one of ATSE's prime projects, and it has been another extraordinary year for schools, with ongoing fallout from fire, from floods, and from the pandemic. So although our available finances were reduced this year, the New South Wales Division has been able to send Stellar equipment to the Wellington High School, bringing to a total 11 schools that we have supported. Peter Pentland has managed the Stellar program for many years, and we thank him and wish him well on his retirement from this position. And we welcome Camille Thompson as the new convener of the program and look forward to working with her. So there have been government submissions and reports during the year, and we have contributed to many. The major report towards a waste-free future, and other submissions and position papers on net zero emissions, research commercialisations, and infrastructure. They're important articles and position papers. Division finances, of course, again, excellently managed by John Baxter. We've been able to hold some functions, and we've been able to support the high school under the Stellar, Wellington High School under the Stellar program, and John will present the financial report later. So a huge thank you to Kylie Walker and her renewed executive and support teams for their ongoing contribution and support of our division activities. Transition to the new Secretariat structure and the move to Canberra has been exceptionally well achieved, and very much appreciation to our two board members, Richard and Mark. And finally, my sincere thanks and appreciation to all the committee who have worked well and supported the activities of the New South Wales Division over the year, in particular to Robin King as both Deputy Chair and our super efficient Secretary. So if the division has run smoothly and has been effective, it's thanks to their efforts, and it's been a pleasure working with such an enthusiastic and wise committee. So are there any questions to me from the report? If not, then I would now like to invite the conveners to present their reports. And the first one, new membership development. Laura is an apology. Robin, would you please present that?
Thank you, Anne. As you said in your report, Anne, we welcomed 10 new fellows last year, and that made a significant contribution towards meeting the goals of 40% new fellows being women and 40% being industry and government, particularly women. The 9 of the successful nominees were actually academics last year, 1 from government and 1 from CSRO. We congratulate them all, and thank you, Anne, for reading out their names earlier, several on the call, I think. During the round for 2021 that Laura took over being convener for, it was very, very good, I think, to hear that the president of membership, Professor Doreen Thomas, had convened a new committee for the membership coordinators to further address the membership diversity goals and provide a more coordinated function for the Academy as a whole. Now, the results for the 2021 round, the outcomes have been finalised, but we don't know them yet as ordinary fellows of the organisation. But I think the outcomes will be known within a few weeks for us to vote on. But there was a reduced number of nominations in 2021, and only 7 of these from New South Wales. It's a big job, and proposers and seconders have to do a lot to nominate both, make nominations both for fellows based in New South Wales and indeed for those in other states. So certainly the coordinators, and speaking on behalf of Laura, thanks everyone for acting in the roles of proposers, seconders, supporters and referees in the current round, especially with the difficulties that COVID-19 has put on us. So for the 2022 round, we encourage all fellows to consider proposing suitable candidates. Given that our numbers of nominees from industry remain low, we particularly encourage fellows to think about prominent members, potential members in the business sector. And I imagine the date for stage 1 nomination 2022 will be similar to last year. In other words, towards the end of February. But it's never too early to start the process of collecting names of prospective nominees and drumming up support for them. And if you need support, to reach out to the membership coordinator, who will not in fact be Laura next year, but I'll leave Anne to explain that later on in the meeting, or now if she wishes to do so. So happy to answer any questions, but I'm a stand-in for the presenting this report.
Okay, thank you, Robin. So if there are no questions, I'd like to ask Dick Kell to give us a report on the ATSI Union Club Luncheons series.
I'm no longer muted. Yes, thank you, Anne. I'm pleased to do that. Before I do, thank you very much for those kind words at the outset. It was quite an honour and humbling to get the Pronji Award last night.
Well done, well done.
I will say it was a night that Aussies rocked, because a fellow, Tony Barry, who is in the Victorian Division, he was installed as president of FIDIC. He's the 3rd Australian president in the 110-year history of FIDIC. There are about 110, 120 nations as members, and he is the 3rd Australian, and I have to say that all 3 have been Academy Fellows. So we have a significant influence. There were some suggestions that it was a bit odd that the new president and the Pronji awardee were both Australians, but I explained that away as well. You know, that's of course we're pretty good. Yes, I'll move on with the luncheons. This, I think, was our 8th year, and the luncheons are held jointly with the Union Club, the UUSC Club in the city, and they've been very successful over the years. Their purpose is to showcase the abilities of the Academy to the Academy Fellows to people in the city who are not necessarily members of the Academy. They're members of the club or their contacts from within the city, and that works very well. We had 3 lunches during the reporting year, 2 of them toward the end of 2020, and the first of those was our esteemed chair, Professor Anne Green, and her university colleague, Professor Ivor Cairns, on the subject of watch this space. There is a lot going on, which was to do with space and space junk and space developments and so on. Most interesting. And the interesting thing about that, it was the first of our hybrid meetings forced upon us by COVID. So we were able to have 30 at the club, and there were another 50 or 60 online. And so we learned to present with the dual presentation. The second event was in late November, 25th of November, and it was on infrastructure, building Australia back to prosperity. And our speakers were Dr. John Pickhaver, the co-head of Macquarie Capital, and our fellow Romilly Madu, AO, the CEO of Infrastructure Australia. And on that event, the club had reorganised a bit, so we were able to have over 100 guests on site, and there were another 50 or 60 online. That worked very well. The third event was early this year on the 29th of April. Dr. Catherine Woodthorpe, AO FTSE, was a speaker, and the second speaker was an interesting fellow, Ralph Evans, AO, who has quite a distinguished career as a diplomat and academic in Australia, and he spoke from his book, which is this book, Post. I realised when I started speaking that I had it out here. And they spoke on the subject, climate change is caused by human activity, so what should we be doing about it? And that was a very active Q&A session. And that's one of the features of the lunches that we have, is that we try and maximise the Q&A. The third lunch that we had organised for the year, Professor Laura Poole-Warren and Dr. Nigel Lovell were to speak on the subject of connected health. Is this our future post-COVID? We had to postpone and then postpone again, and we've now postponed that until next year, as there is no certainty, and in fact isn't any certainty at this point, and the club therefore is reluctant to take any bookings. So that's been unfortunate. We did have another event penciled in with Professor Emma Johnson speaking, but that again will be transferred to next year. We could go online to do these, to present these speakers, but the whole concept of these lunches was to give the opportunity for ATSE fellows and other people to network and meet. And so we've decided unanimously that we should persevere with our hybrid model, or maybe, who knows, next year a fully opened up model, back to having a little lunch on site. So keep watching the news and you'll find out when the next events are. We have planned to make a few changes we'll probably introduce a debate type presentation next year. We will be looking at expanding the guests into some of our senior bureaucrats and politicians. So we'll see where that goes. The Firstly, I should place on record our deep appreciation of the Union Club in co-hosting these events. They're an excellent partner, very cooperative. I should note that we have improved our technology. Mitchell Pearce is, I think, on this call, and he's been involved in that with A.D. Patterson and Anne Green, and so you'll see a better result there. And then I should also acknowledge the organising committee, and of course it's led by by Dr. Peter Tyree, AM, who is brings all the energy and ideas to our committee, as long as working as the link with the Union Club. We've got Professor Robin King, Dr. John Baxter, Dr. A.D. Patterson, I mentioned, and with support from Mitchell Pearce. So look forward to a very active program next year. Thanks.
Thanks, Dick. Any questions? I forgot to say, if you have questions, either raise your hand electronically, since I've got too many people to see on one screen, or put questions in the chat. And this will also be the mechanism when Sarah is speaking after this meeting. Thanks a lot. So could I now ask David Tanner to give our weekend away report?
Okay, thank you, Anne. Yes, early this year, we were fortunate enough to be able to have our weekend away on the 26th to 29th of March. In retrospect, we're in a good slot between some lockdowns that happened in Christmas and some subsequently. So we were pleased we could fit that in. So this year we went to the Snowy Mountains, and 31 fellows, partners, and guests participated. And most visited the newly opened ATSI offices on the way down in Canberra, at which Kylie gave us a short presentation. And then we went to the Ridges Hotel in Jindabyne, which overlooks the lake there. And we had a pretty busy weekend. Activities included the Snowy Mountains Discovery Center, where we were treated to a 3D presentation of the Snowy 2 development, and as well as an explanation of the existing scheme, which was very informative. We also went to the Gaydon Trout Hatchery, the Wild Brumby Snaps Distillery, and one of the highlights was a Snowy Hydro Tumut 2 generator station near Cabramatta, which had recently been subject to some bushfires in the beginning of 2020. So that was interesting to see that, you know, the after effects of those fires. We also, a number of people managed to visit the heritage landmark for the rock bolting, which was developed at a site near Cooma back in the 50s, which was used for fixing concrete into tunnels. And it was an Australian development, and there's quite an interesting display there. And a number of us also took the chairlift up from Thredbo up to Mount Krakenbach, and then walked back up towards Mount Kosciuszko. And the whole thing was recorded by David Cohen in a huge amount of detail, but by his photography skills. So he was extremely enthusiastic, and that if anybody wants a link to the photos or has lost it or whatever, just contact me. I'm pretty sure I can find it again. And just disappointed we weren't able to do a trip that was scheduled later this year in October. So, and we ended up financially reasonably well off. I think we came up with a surplus of close to $3,000. I can't remember exactly. So that, you know, was good on that aspect. And I think everybody enjoyed it, and I certainly did. So thank you to everybody who came. So
thanks, David. Yeah, it was a fabulous trip, and very disappointing that we couldn't go ahead with our Newcastle trip, but we'll do it next year. So Ganilla has been very helpful, and Mark Hoffman also, and we just had to unwind all of the things we had in place. So the final convener report, and I did it slightly out of order, was our annual symposium, which was held very successfully in August. And I was going to get Robin to give a brief update of that.
Yes, the annual report includes a page-and-a-half report on the symposium that we organised for August the 10th. So I won't read every word of it, but just point out some highlights. This was going to be our inaugural event at the premises of Engineers Australia's new offices in the CBD of City and Market Street as a partnership. But planning an event for August the 10th, of course, was stymied by the early June by the lockdown. So it finished up being not a hybrid event, but an entirely Zoom event. But we not using Zoom as it happens, but we did stick to the original timetable of doing it all in one day with sessions of about an hour and 20 minutes and a decent break between them. And I think that worked out pretty well. I would like to thank Engineers Australia as the principal partner, and they are in process of producing a transcript video from the day. And also I'd like to thank Mitchell and his team in Engineers Australia for their provision of the services for registration and so on, and support generally. And most of all, to thank the organising committee, co-chair Dr. Camilla Burrows, Annabelle Duncan, Adi Patterson, and Laura Poole Warren and John Baxter, for their contribution in making the programme. I think what everyone has said was a pretty good day, and several people on the meeting call tonight were involved in one way or another. We did gain sponsorships from the University of New South Wales and the University of Sydney and the New South Wales Smart Sensing Network, and they're greatly appreciated, even though all of the purposes for which those sponsorships were intended were not necessary in the end. The sponsors have not, still committed to supporting ATSI, I shall say. Now, just highlight some of the key speakers. Andrew Stevens, Chair of Industry Innovation Science Australia, and Professor Mary O'Kane, former Chief Scientist, set the scene national in an international context on how we might scale up Australia's R&D based innovation. The first session of speakers immediately involved with innovation was called Commercialisation Journeys, and Dr. Alison Todd, who's already been mentioned tonight, and two others gave terrific talks about the development of their ideas, one in energy, Alison in biomedical area, and Chris Beale in the minerals processing area, how their developments have turned into successful companies. We had Parliamentary Secretary to the Premier, MP, the Honourable Gabriel Upton, and Professor Barney Glover, and Dr. Nathaniel Babington from the City of Newcastle, talking about the roles of government and the universities in supporting innovation and commercialisation. And Professor Barney Glover's speech was actually the focus of a report in the following day in the Australian Higher Education newspaper. We then looked at developing entrepreneurial mindsets and cultures through the eyes of two organisations. The Sydney School of Entrepreneurship, Dr. Sarah Jones, the CEO, spoke together with one of her protégés, Scott McKeon, and Mr. David Burt, the Director of Entrepreneurship at the University of New South Wales, spoke about the Founders Program, which he organises with his alumna, Dr. Heba Kamis, elaborating on on transitioning her PhD work through her startup company. And in the last session of the day, Reflections and Directions, we heard from another eminent ATSI Fellow, Professor Veena Sajwala, Dr. Adi Patterson, and Dr. Roy Green, who is chair of the Advanced Robotics for Manufacturing Hub and many other positions. And to conclude the day with our principal partner, Engineers Australia, the Chief Engineer of Engineers Australia, Jane McMaster, gave an excellent summary, which I've summarised into a paragraph later in my report. And she picked up the main messages of the day. So we had 105 attendees. Some came in and some for some sessions and left others. But during the whole day, there were more than 90 for all sessions. That was 105 attendees plus the named speakers. Most of the speakers are from, well, no, not most, a good proportion of speakers were from engineering. Very useful, I must say, from Mitch Pearcey to collect the data about the occupations or areas of interest that attendees to these events actually hold. The event, I think, provided a very good overview and summary of the issues involved in research commercialisation in Australia. We beat ourselves up a bit too much, perhaps. There are some very good examples, but there are also some gaps. And the issue of scaling is often one of identifying the customer base against which revenue can be attracted to underpin the scaling up. We noted that investors in Australia tend to be risk averse and venture capital funds are limited. The Q&A session, so in the Q&A session, there was at the end, there was the issue of directing some of the immense wealth, more of the immense wealth in superannuation funds to encourage innovation. Seems like a good idea, but yet to be realised. And that innovation was not adequately covered and celebrated in our popular media. So as the chair of the event, I would say I had a few moments of anxiety in the run up to it, but I was very pleased with the way it worked out in the end. And that was due, I think, entirely to good teamwork and the excellent contributions of everyone who participated. So I would like to thank all of those named, plus indeed Chris Von Willer, who chaired one of the sessions, who's on the screen at the moment, whom I didn't mention. But everyone, chairs, speakers, and the committee did a fantastic job and support us in having a good event. And I hope we will be able to have both face-to-face and hybrid events of a similar nature in due course. Thank you, Anne.
Thanks, Robin. Yeah, I attended. It was extremely well run and the technology worked well and the speakers were excellent. So thank you for all our conveners. I'd like to now move to the financial report. And John, if you would like to present your profit and loss.
Yeah, well, everyone, the financial report for financial year 2021 is on page 7 of the annual report. In that opening paragraph, I just highlight that this is the first financial year where we've actually used the financial system Xero to generate the data. In past years, it's been done pretty well on a manual basis using MYOB. So the first 4 months of this financial year, more or less from July through to November, I worked pretty hard with our finances manager, Penny Thompson in Canberra, to try to get the characterisation of the data sensible to the point that it can provide useful feedback to us. So originally the financial report for each month was only going to be generated across state by state. In other words, we get just a simple P&L for New South Wales. But of course, that's no use to us in terms of managing our various events. So in the end, we ended up with a format, sort of a cross matrix, if you like, where the data could be analysed in Xero across states and also across events. So we can now get an individual P&L for an actual event, which of course provides us useful feedback for running our events. So as far as financial year 2021, I'm just going to touch on a few points there, but they're pretty well made in my written report. We had a net loss of $374 for the financial year. You can see that down the bottom there with the brackets. The operating loss was $5,727, but don't be too scared by that number, because normally each year, as you can see down the bottom, ATSI makes a $5,000 sort of subsidy or contribution to our New South Wales organisation each year. And also it's a carry forward profit from the previous financial year of $353. So as I said, the net loss was only $374. This was a very, as Anne has alluded to, it's an exceptional year. We only really had half as many paying events as we normally would have in a financial year. We didn't actually have a symposium in the financial year. The symposium that Robin has talked about, of course, it happened in August and is actually going to contribute about, it by the way, had a $10,800 surplus, $10,800 surplus for that event. And that's going to contribute, in a dramatic way towards our finances for financial year 21-22. But we didn't have a symposium in the financial year I'm talking about. But we did have the weekend away, which generated about a $1,490 surplus, $1,490 surplus. And we did have 4 Union Club events, of which were mixed. Some were hybrid and some were just purely online. Those events in a typical way generate a small loss, a small profit, which they did in this case. And as I said, we did contribute, as you can see on that spreadsheet that's up at the moment, we did contribute towards one Stellar school, the high school at Wellington High School, a $6,000 Stellar contribution there. That makes a total of 11 schools we've now supported over the last, 5 or 6, 7 years. I think that's, I'm just going to see if I think that pretty well covers all the major points. I'm not going to talk in detail about event by event, the management of event by events financially. We'll probably, there's another time is probably more suitable for that. But just bear in mind that when I mentioned that large surplus for the symposium, which actually occurred in 21-22 in August, just August a few months ago, that large surplus was mainly generated, of course, by, as Robin alluded to, the sponsorships. And of course, in normal circumstances, a lot of that money would have been spent on the catering for the event, which of course we didn't have because it ended up as a virtual event. So in normal circumstances, you wouldn't make that large surplus, but just in this one-off time, in these very exceptional circumstances where we're in lockdown, we're in the third lockdown in Sydney, or the greater Sydney, we actually did receive the sponsorship from the 3 universities, but didn't actually have to spend the money on anything. So that's really going to help finances for 2021-22, which I'll be talking about in 12 months' time. I don't think there's anything there else that I need to touch on. It's pretty well covered in the written report. As I said, I mean, we get an event by event analysis every month out of the Xero system. It's quite a good report now, and we can actually see the profitability or how much loss is made by each event, and we can use that as, and the whole intention of that, of course, is to provide a bit of feedback to the way we price events, and the way we charge, and how much sponsorship is needed, and that sort of thing. So I guess if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
I've got a question. Archie Johnston here. Have you considered giving the money back to the universities? They're struggling at this point in time. Yeah, I don't know if it would be a sensible move.
I guess that would be a question for Robin, really, as the convener of that symposium. I mean, it could be considered, bearing in mind that the intention that normally these symposiums do run at a surplus, like more typically about a $2,000 to $3,000 surplus. And of course, the reason for that is that we have the catering for the event. In this case, Engineers Australia did provide the venue, but of course the venue itself didn't need to be used. We did actually take advantage of the IT facilities at Engineers Australia. So that was an in-kind support that Engineers Australia gave us. But perhaps, Robin, if you'd like to answer
Yes,
that question.
when we went to an online version, I asked all of the sponsors whether they wanted their money back, and they didn't. But my view is that we should be generous to them in terms of places and seats in future events, in recognition of their contribution to that particular event.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Thanks for that, John.
Right,
yeah, and I absolutely agree with your comment, Robin, about what we should do. Okay, thank you for that. So the next item on the agenda is the election of committee and office bearers for 2021-22. And since the last annual meeting, 2 committee members have stepped down. And so I'd like to again acknowledge and thank Trevor Bird and Alan Chappell for their invaluable contributions to the work of the Academy and to the New South Wales Division. I've also received word recently that Martin Thomas and Laura Poole Warren are also stepping down from the committee today. So I extend special thanks to Martin for his long and illustrious contribution to the division, to the forums, and to ATSI generally. And to Laura, sincere thanks for her stewardship as membership coordinator, which is a very time-consuming role. But I'm pleased to report that all 4 of those distinguished fellows wish to remain as corresponding members of the division, which is great. So during the year, we're also very pleased to have welcomed Adi Patterson and Sarah Pearce to the committee earlier. And now we come to the election, which is why we have, this is for the positions of particularly the chair and the secretary, and it's why we have the returning officers of ATSI on this call. So in the notice of the meeting, you received an invitation to join the committee and to nominate for the position of chair, secretary, treasurer, and membership development coordinator. So with the new process of the election being implemented by the Secretariat, I now would like to hand over to David Cook to manage the process, at least for the chair and for the secretary. So thank you, David.
Thank you, Anne. Therefore, I wish in this process to advise that the ATSI terms of reference for divisions require the committee positions of chair and secretary to be confirmed at each annual meeting. Therefore, I will begin by considering the position of chair. The annual meeting notice that you all received invited fellows to nominate for the role of chair. Only 1 nomination was received from Anne Green to continue in the role. I can confirm that Anne has not exceeded the term limits specified in the terms of reference and is eligible to stand. And we thank Anne for her nomination. As I've already indicated, and has Anne, that fellows were invited to nominate for the chair. Only 1 nomination was received, but are there any other nominations? As there appear not to be, I will now move on to the role of secretary. Again, the annual meeting notice invited fellows to nominate for the role of secretary. Only 1 nomination was received from Robin King to continue in the role. I can confirm Robin has not exceeded the term limit specified in the terms of reference and is eligible to stand. And we thank Robin for his nomination. Again, fellows were invited to nominate for the role of secretary. Only 1 nomination was received, but are there any other nominations? As there are no other nominations received for these two positions, I therefore wish to confirm that Anne as chair for the 21-22 year and Robin as secretary for the same time have been re-elected. I would, in doing so, I'd like to acknowledge the contributions that both Anne and Robin have made for in the 2021 year. I think the division has benefited greatly from the dedication and enthusiasm and efficiency that both of them have brought to their respective roles, and I commend them for their contributions to the division. Thank you. I'll now pass back to Anne.
Thank you. Thank you, David, for those kind words. On behalf of both myself and from behalf of Robin too, it's been a pleasure for both of us. We've really enjoyed working with the division. So now we still have two other positions for which we don't require formal election. One is for the honorary treasurer, and I'm delighted to say that John Baxter has agreed to continue to serve as our treasurer, and he has done a superb job, in particular in shifting from what was a very time-intensive way of having to prepare financial documents, reports, to working with Penny Thompson to get the new system up and running. So thank you very much for that, John. And I'm delighted that you will be continuing as treasurer. So congratulations. And then the second position, new members convener. So Laura has indicated that she's too overcommitted and she has requested to step down. But we have a stalwart. David Cook has given 10 years to his contribution with the membership at various stages, from drafting new guidelines to sitting on the committees to chairing the committees. And he no longer has a formal position in ATSI centrally, but he has indicated that he would be happy to take on the position of new membership convener. So David, I'm extremely grateful. It is also a time-consuming role, but your wisdom and your understanding of the role, I think, will assist us. So thank you very much to David. So now to the rest of the committee. And again, we don't need to have elections. And the way that New South Wales has managed its committee is very inclusive. We've welcomed anybody who would like to be involved. And there have been lots of different kinds of activities, from organising events, organising symposia, making submissions, productivity submissions, preparing position papers. And New South Wales has been very active, and the committee has been extremely collegial in working together. So I contacted all of the people, excuse me, all the people on the committee, and I'm delighted to say that the following members are prepared to and happy to stay on the committee: Ian Brown, Camilla Burrows, David Cook, Hans Costa, Annabelle Duncan, Mark Hoffman, Dick Kell, Nigel Lovell, George Multiborough, Cecile Paris, Adi Patterson, Sarah Pearce, Richard Sheldrake, and David Tanner. And we have also two new members who have indicated that they would be happy to come to the committee and to contribute. One is Chris Von Willer and the second one is Trevor Danos. So thank you to the two new members, but also thank you to all of the other committee members. And we couldn't operate without the contribution, the expertise, and the enthusiasm that you have all given to our various activities. So I thank you all very much. So we now come, we're okay on time, to other business. And at this stage, we have one item of other business. You will have received a copy of the ACOLA statement in response to the Uluru Statement from the Heart. ATSI fellow David Hund, OAM, was a member of the reference group who was drafting the response through ACOLA. And I would like to invite David to give us some background on the ACOLA statement, which was recently launched on August the 6th, 4 years after the Uluru Statement was released, and to just give us some context and an update. Thank you, David.
Okay, thank you indeed, Anne. And Rob and I did unmute before doing this segment. Look, I'd just like to say, first of all, what an honour it's been and a privilege for me to be part of this process and an education. And I'd also like to acknowledge the contribution of Anne and Robin and the New South Wales Committee in the way this ACOLA statement has in fact been delivered. I spoke at the committee meeting about 2 years ago, and the committee was enthusiastic, and Robin and Anne and Robin in particular, I know, were very influential at ATSI Assembly, and the matter was referred to ACOLA, and you've now seen the outcome. Just a bit of a refreshment. I wasn't that familiar with ACOLA, but it's kind of the peak body of the learned academies. Humanities, 5 of them, humanities, science, social sciences, ATSI, and health and medical sciences. And New Zealand's got a different system because they're smaller, but it is a peak body, and its public profile is somewhat muted, but on an issue like this, I think it's very important that they have done what they've done. As Anne says, the statement, the Uluru Statement, was released on May 26, 2017, and it was a process set up by government, a 12-month process set up by the National Commonwealth Government, a very rigorous process of consultation around Australia, and that followed 10 years of build-up to the Uluru Statement. After it was launched in May 2017, which is now 4 years ago, many peak bodies and most large listed companies have offered their public support of this statement. And that's on the basis that it is fundamental to our recognition of the past, and also fundamental to how we see ourselves and what our knowledge base is for today and for tomorrow. It is indeed everyone's knitting, and not a kind of issue over here which we can contemplate or not contemplate. ATSI referred the question of itself publicly supporting the Uluru Statement to ACOLA, which set up a reference group. And there were 2 members from each of the academies on the reference group, and Dr. Sarah Ryan and I were volunteered by Hugh Bradlow and Kylie Walker to be the ATSI nominees. And out of the 10 reference group members, just 1 was Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, and that's Professor Alex Brown from Health and Medical Sciences. And if you want some inspiration, you should read Alex's CV. Now, we can't expect everybody to have a CV like Alex has got, but his contribution was fundamental, and I think it's probably a bit of a pointer to the future. This response, the content of this response, would have been very different if Alex was not part of the reference group and did not make a significant contribution. And I suspect there are many things in our society which already benefit from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander contribution, but many more which could so benefit. And as I said, this was a learning experience for me, just to see the impact of somebody from his cultural heritage and make that particular contribution. And this is what you've seen in the document. Now, ATSI has no fellows who identify publicly as Indigenous, and that was one of the reasons why Sarah Ryan and I were nominated, because we did not have an Indigenous fellow that we could nominate to participate in this reference group. If you read the reference group's response, it's quite confronting. And before Alex's input, some of the original versions of it were quite bland, and partly because I guess the white people did not want to be accused of political correctness. And so you'll see at the bottom of the response that it acknowledges the contribution that was made into the input of the statement and also some Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander leaders were consulted on the final draft, and they also provided some insights into how this would be most beneficially received by the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community, but also perhaps by the rest of Australia. So some 4 years later, all of the academies in Australia, we've got 900 fellows, I think, and most of the other academies are 400 to 500 or 600. So all those learned academies have now responded and recognised the Uluru Statement, and in basically unapologetic ways. And I think that's kind of fundamental. And as I say, I personally was really delighted to be invited and to participate, and what a learning exercise it was. I'm conscious of time, and there may be a question or two. If not, that's okay. In this area, I also wanted to mention that, and it's, if you go to the ATSI website, you'll see this, that ATSI is developing a reconciliation action plan. And this has been sponsored by the Diversity and Inclusion Committee of the Academy. And Dr. Sarah Ryan and I are co-chairs of a reference group to basically progress the reconciliation action plan. Many organisations have already done this, so there's a lot of, we're well down the experience curve on this process. A particular challenge, as I mentioned, for ATSI is that we do not have a single Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander fellow to participate and provide insight. So we formed a reference group. It's got 16 people. 7 of that 16 are Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander leaders in STEM, and of those 7, 3 are women, and then of the 16 members, 6 are women. So it's a very diverse group, both from a cultural heritage perspective and also gender perspective. We've had one meeting where it's kind of wrestling with what to do with our second meeting, including answering the question, why should ATSI have a reconciliation action plan? Our Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander reference group members are particularly interested in that, and not being fellows, their first priority is not the welfare of ATSI. It's the benefit and welfare and recognition of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander STEM practitioners. So it will be a journey. There are 4 stages in a reconciliation action plan, and ATSI is committed to doing the first stage, and that is no small matter. It's early days, but I think it will be of benefit to the stakeholders, which is identified in our mission statement: industry, the community and education, and the advice and brainpower that ATSI can bring. And if we can incorporate and include Indigenous knowledge, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander knowledge in that process, and in the way we recognise people in STEM, that will be a good thing. So that's my report. Thank you, Anne.
Thank you, David. Does anybody have any questions or comments? Yes.
And just a question to you, David. In things like the new Australian national curriculum, the word First Peoples has come in as being the defining category. I wondered if that was also happening in respect of the Uluru Statement.
The reason I smile, Robin, it's a good question, because this was one of the debating points that we had at our first meeting. And of course, there's not unanimity of view on this matter with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So the language that we are using is Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. and I sort of used the term Indigenous once during my report and then corrected myself. And, you know, other terms are First Nations, First People. So it's a sort of a debating point which actually doesn't need a resolution, I think. But what it does need, I think, is the question. And particularly if you're with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, it's not a bad question to ask. How would you prefer that I describe your cultural heritage? And you won't get the same answer from every Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander person or group that you meet. So there's no one answer to this, but we didn't land on anything in particular, except that our group is using the term Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, even though it's a bit long, and ATSI itself shortened its own name because it was a bit long. We've decided to put up with the length and we can remember it, and that's what we're using. We haven't come across anybody who objects to that terminology.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions to David? So before I close the meeting, and I have 5 minutes, slightly less, no, slightly more. Does anybody wish to raise any further items that we haven't addressed in the agenda? I have one thing that I'd quite like to, we didn't have time to discuss before, and this is to do with membership. I had quite a good discussion. I've had discussions both with Laura and with David on the challenge, and with Robin, on the challenges of and the time-consuming nature of proposing new fellows. And this year, as Robin has reported, that there were quite a reduction in the number of people put up. I'm sure the quality of the nominees and the people who will be elected to fellows is as high as it ever has been. Does anybody have any, I guess, suggestions as to how we can perhaps make this process more effective? I know Robin also mentioned that most of the new fellows that have been that are coming up, I think, are academic. Oh, no, from last year, were academics, and there has been some suggestion and some mixed messages on whether proposing people from industry and government has been more challenging. So do we have any comments on how we can perhaps better address this, keeping a more diverse fellowship? Because academics, it's easier, I should say. We always have our CV up to date for research grants or for publications and various other things, promotions. But that's not necessarily true in business or with government. Any helpful hints? Yes, Hans. You're muted. Unmute.
So, you know, I think it's a complicated process. But by the very nature of it, it is going to be complicated. And I don't think it's so, the fact that the publications don't count for very much, having an up-to-date publication list that industry people might not have doesn't really make any difference. It is impact. And I would have thought that impact could, you know, is hard to do even for academics. And so for industry, I would like to see more industry people there. But I'm not sure how we can help them more than we have, except by looking out for them and nominating them.
I agree. I wasn't saying just publications, but I think also, yes, an impact is clearly extremely important. But I just wonder, the statistics from last year say that more academics are elected than other areas. Although, David, is there anything, maybe something I wanted to say, maybe we should be focusing more through the forums as the source of new candidates rather than trying to do it through the divisions, because at the moment it's the divisions are doing the generation. David, did you have any comment you wanted to make on this?
Yes, I do. And I mean, the point that Anne is making, I think, is one that those of us who have been involved in the membership process over a long period of time recognise. And the things that we're looking at doing is that, I think the division might be aware that I'm the chair of the Infrastructure Forum. And with the Infrastructure Forum, I've begun the process already in terms of identifying potential candidates for the 2022 round. And one of the, there are two factors in this. First of all, it's as identified is perhaps the documentation itself. But secondly, it is identifying people who are prepared to perhaps do the nomination, but be referees or supporters of candidates. Certainly for stage one, it is required that they be fellows. And this sometimes for industry people is a challenge. The reason that we're starting now, and I think it's going to be, and it's the comments that I've provided to Doreen, is that I think it is something that we need to do now, particularly for industry people, because the difficulty in terms of finding supporters is not a trivial one, and it does take time. And I think the other comment that Anne has made about the forum's involvement, I think is very important. But the overriding issue that I've discussed with Doreen is that it is an academy issue, and that it's not necessarily, it shouldn't necessarily fall to the divisions or the forums. It really falls to all of us in terms of the academy that we want in the future. And it's incumbent upon us as fellows to be able to identify those that we believe will be able to contribute to the academy in the future. And the meetings that Doreen is convening with the membership coordinators she will follow those with meetings with the forums as well, so that the coverage that we have is to provide the message that I've just given. It's not to let it fall to the divisions is not appropriate. To let it fall to the forums is not appropriate. It needs to fall on all of our shoulders. And that's the message that Doreen will be trying to get across.
Thank you, David. And I think that's a very good thing to finish. Now, I've just got a message from Mitch saying that I've got 0 time. So I'd like to formally close the annual meeting and to thank all of the New South Wales Fellows who have attended and have contributed. Welcome to our new committee members. Thank you to everybody who has assisted the work of the foundation, and thank you to the Secretariat for tonight's support.